Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of HSP TV. I am your host, Barbara, and today I am joined by the wonderful Molly Sider, and we will be talking about nothing's wrong with me. I'm just an empath. And that came to be because for a lot of empaths, myself included, there was a time in my life where I seriously thought there was something wrong with me, that I was broken, or that I needed to fix myself or change myself. And I know I'm not the only one. I know there are a lot more people out there, including you, Molly. And that's why I think it is very important that we talk about this for the people that still genuinely believe there's something wrong with them and that they need to fix themselves. So thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on my show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so excited to be here.
So I am guessing, because this is the talk of what you want to be talking about with me, that you also have an experience similar like mine, where there was a time in your life where you thought there's something wrong with me.
Oh yeah. Yes. I grew up with the idea that like I was oversensitive. I was a really sensitive child. I'm a really sensitive person, as us empaths are. Um, but as a child, I remember not really understanding this feeling, right? And I remember standing like in the window at my house growing up, and watching people walk down the street, and I swore I could feel whatever they were feeling. I could pass somebody on the street and I would just be like overwhelmed with some sort of an emotion that I didn't recognize. It didn't feel like my own. But as a child, I didn't really know what was happening. I also thought, well, everyone must feel this way. And as I started to get a little bit older, I started to think, well, I can't possibly be feeling other people's emotions. That's not a thing. Like, I've never heard of this. Um, I must be imagining this. I'm a dreamer anyway. Um, this is in my head. And sort of put it to the back of my mind as I got older and older and older. And then when I was in I think my like late 20s, early 30s, I was at like a Whole Foods. I was grocery shopping at Whole Foods. And they always have like the magazines, before you check out. And they had an issue of Psychology Today. And the feature story that was on the cover was I can't remember what the title was, but it was something about like, are you an empath, or do you feel other people's feelings? You might be an empath or something like that.
Mhm.
And I saw it and I was like, I will pick that up and read that. That feels like very familiar to me. And I read the whole feature in this magazine. Just, it was my first time ever reading or hearing that somebody else was feeling the way that I had been feeling, that this was not, I wasn't making this up,
Mhm.
that I was actually really feeling these emotions that weren't necessarily mine. And I read the whole thing and then I handed it out to all of my friends. And I was like, if you ever really want to understand me fully, please read this
Sure.
article because this is who I am. And it just gave me such a relief. It made me feel obviously seen. It made me feel not alone. And it made me feel like I was like not crazy all these years since I was a little kid. I'm like, oh, I'm not, there's nothing wrong with me. This is a real this is a real thing that some people have. So that was my aha moment.
I love that, and yeah, I just wanted to say it's something that really spoke to you or that called out to you, and you see that headline and you think, oh, this is I'm supposed to be taking you home.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I should also add that like after that, all these other things sort of like mirrors started popping up. Like I started I started paying closer attention to my dreams, or not even on purpose, just like was sort of realizing and understanding that my dreams were starting, some of my dreams or pieces of my dreams were starting to come true like the next day. Um, and I could predict things. I could understand, like, oh, I dreamt about this. That means this thing is probably going to happen tomorrow. And it would, things like that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I started to realize that and pay attention to that. And then I remember I worked with an acupuncturist for a few years and he was wonderful. This is in New York. And I remember him just asking me point blank one day, so can you tell the future in your dreams? And I was like, what? How did you know that? And all of these little things started adding up, and I was like, all right, I'm not the only one
Mhm.
in the world, and I'm not crazy, and there's nothing wrong with me.
I
And
love
also,
that you're
this is such a superpower. What a fun thing to have to be able to do.
exactly. Yes. I
Yeah.
love that you're sharing that so much, and thank you for it. And if you, listener out there, recognize yourself in this story, then I would love it if you could let us know by leaving a comment below this video. Because for me, it wasn't like that. I felt very different from other people, but I wasn't aware that I could feel other people's feelings. And I think it might be because of the trauma that was going on in my childhood, and also the bullying at school. I wasn't very connected to myself. I always thought that what I'm feeling is mine because I'm feeling it. So I could go from extremely happy to inconsolably sad in seemingly the blink of an eye. And if someone like my mother or a teacher would then ask me, "Why are you crying?" I was like, "I don't know. Did something happen? I don't know. Did you hurt yourself? Not that I know of, right? So why are you crying? I don't know." And it wasn't until years later, also in my mid 20s, 30s, something there, when someone told me, "Yeah, but you are an HSP because you're exactly like my wife, and my wife is an HSP, so you must be one." That I started reading about it. That was my trigger moment, and then I discovered that as a highly sensitive person with highly empathic abilities, so also being an empath, you can feel other people's emotions as if they are your own. And I thought, oh my God, that's why I could never say why I was sad, because in that moment I realized it was not my sadness I was feeling. I was expressing somebody else's sadness. I think my mother's, looking back on it. So I felt very different. And I was also told that I was way too sensitive and I shouldn't take everything so personal. And I really needed to grow a thicker skin. And all of these wonderful, uplifting remarks that people can make. But I never once suspected that what I was feeling wasn't mine.
That's so interesting. I like so many thoughts just came up. Like when I was a little, that I never even thought about it until you just were saying all that. When I was really little, I would get really emotional too. And I was like very attached to my mom, and I didn't want to leave her side, and I didn't want to have sleepovers at my friend's house. And I would go, if I slept over at friend's house, I often would cry in the middle of the night because I was like, and I don't know what that was. I don't know if that was me being an empath or me just being like having, attachment issues, um, or maybe some sort of combination. But so many, nobody understood it. I didn't understand it. I was ashamed of it. It still feels very scary to say that out loud. uh,
Mhm.
but yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I get it because especially when you cannot pinpoint the origins, you
Mhm.
start really always looking within yourself, right? What's wrong with me that I don't even know why am I so sad? And how stupid a person must I be that I just start crying for no reason? Who does that? Things
Yeah.
like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the being called like you're too sensitive and you're too emotional. I mean, I had like, you know, boys would be like, I could never date you. You're too emotional. I mean, how painful. And
Yeah.
then, of course, receiving that as a very, I mean, it's just like this cycle. It's like, as receiving that as a very sensitive, as a highly sensitive person, of course, I received that as I'm bad. I'm the problem. I'm wrong.
Yes.
Um, he's right. I am too emotional. How do I change that? How do I learn to harden myself or whatever?
Mm,
And, um, that was really that was really hard to pick apart. And I don't even think it was until really my 40s that I started to realize, maybe before that I started to realize like, okay, maybe this is actually a good thing. Maybe my sensitivity is a superpower, but really didn't step into my full like empowerment until my 40s, where I'm like,
mhm.
screw that guy. I
Yes.
feel sad that he doesn't have the emotional capacity that I have. I mean,
How wonderful is that that you can reach that point, right?
yeah.
But, let's go a little bit back for our listeners because they will recognize, I hope, and it would be lovely if you could let us know again in the comments if you recognize what we are talking about. But they will probably recognize that there is a time in their lives where they thought, "Oh my God, I need to change. There's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm broken. I need to turn myself into that person that I think people will want to be friends with, or that they want to be in a relationship with, or that would be the ideal employee, or whatever thoughts that we can have, right? And what then happens is that we start wearing masks. I remember I was wearing a mask for when I was with my friends, a version of me, or for when I was with my friends, a version of me from when I was with my family, a version of me when I was at work. And it's exhausting to keep all of those versions up. And none of these versions are what you feel comfortable in. It's always a high wire. It's always, being on the edge of your toes and having to really work at it. And for me, eventually, that came with physical complaints that led up to a burnout. Did you experience something like that?
Oh, of course. And I think that there's some of that is natural. Some of that is just like as we're growing up and we're getting more and more comfortable, like just in the world and our skin, and we're learning about ourselves. Of course, we're going to be trying on different masks and seeing what fits and what feels good and what doesn't feel good. But I think eventually, as you're saying, hopefully, what everyone eventually realizes is that like your own embodiment is of authenticity is real, is you, is what take the masks off. You don't need to hide, you don't need to mask parts of yourself and your story that um when you're willing to take the mask off and just share, that is when everything starts to fall into place and you get to be more comfortable and you get um I talk about this a lot, like we hide our stories. And when we actually start to share our stories with people, it's like that's when you find the connections. And that's empowering to feel like, oh, I can actually be 100% authentically me right now. And I'm still going to feel connected to other people. People are going to resonate with what I'm saying because we're not all that unique or that different. Like we are very unique in the details of our stories, but we're not so unique in our thoughts, feelings, and emotions, right? So most likely, if I'm feeling away, somebody else is also feeling the same way or feeling something similar.
Mhm.
Um, and so once we start to do that, we realize that being ourselves is actually a superpower, and it's like we are able to release all of this energy that we were just spending hiding behind a mask, someone else's mask, and we can like now redirect that energy towards whatever we want.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. What I just am seeing in my practice, and that's why I wanted to go in that direction, is that a lot of us need to be triggered before we are ready to dive into who we are and discover everything about ourselves. And that usually is some sort of big event, like for me, my burnout, or for other people, maybe losing someone, or their business failing, or some sort of big event that tells you that the way you've been living your life up until then is just not working for you. And I had clients come to me and say, "Well, you're my last hope. I've tried so many different things, and I'm happy with my partner, but he's the only one that gets me. I am very alone. I have no friends. I cannot find any connection with my coworkers, and I don't know what to do. I'm hoping you're the answer, but I'm at the end of my rope." And so many people come to me in that state. And I think part of why I want to talk about these topics is for one, if you are feeling like that, then there's nothing wrong with you. Reach out, we can help. But mostly also to prevent people from having to end up there. Because if you recognize yourself in the story that we've been telling, where you're just trying very hard to fit yourself, your square self, maybe in a round hole, and to be what everybody expects you to be, but not feeling comfortable and happy in those roles, then before it gets that far, take action, because it doesn't have to be that way. Just like what you said, Molly. It's when you discover the ins and outs of who you really are, you discover that you're actually a very beautiful person with a really big heart that loves to be there for people, that loves to help other people, that usually isn't having a good time at a party until they see everybody else having a good time at the party, and that has a lot to offer and a lot to give to the world if you come from your authentic place, right?
Oh God, yeah. And so much of that too is, for empaths is so much harder to do because we pick up on other people's energy. And if we're picking up on somebody else's energy who's maybe not happy or not having a good time at the party or whatever it is, then that we feel that. And there's, there's empaths and codependents kind of overlap. And of course there can be a fuzzy line between what is empathic and what is codependency. Uh,
Mhm.
but it's so much harder for us because we don't want to sit in the feeling, like we don't want to feel it. And so we're going to go out of our way to abandon ourselves to make other people feel comfortable
Mhm.
because if they're not feeling comfortable, we will feel that ourselves.
Yes.
Um, but also that was sort of my comment to like the party, that your party example. But
No, I love it. I made a whole video about the codependent empath, so it is a very valid point. Yeah.
yeah, um, yes, and it's important to think about. But also, like, yeah, if you're feeling unsettled, if you're feeling like you're, you know, at your last hope, whether you catch it before, whether you catch yourself before you get to that place or you're in that place, like it does take some sitting in a very uncomfortable space. And, the only real way to make a big change is to be willing to look in the mirror and to recognize the things that you really like about yourself and also the things that you really don't like about yourself or that you're not as proud of, that you are
Mhm.
like, oh, maybe that's the thing that needs to change. It's really, really uncomfortable and hard to do. And it's so empowering and freeing if you start to do it. It gets a lot easier to do once you start, and it is the thing that will free you to go have the thing that you really want. It's also about unpacking why you don't already have the thing, or why you don't really already feel like you have the thing, or you're not in your power. If you want to make a change, anybody can make a change. Anybody can do whatever they want. If you're like, I'm not happy with my life right now, and nobody understands me, and whatever it is that you're feeling, first of all, yes, you are not the only person who's feeling that way out there. Like there are other people, and know that there is a community out there for you to feel more seen and heard and connected. But one of the reasons why so many people, and I just did a podcast on this the other day too, why so many people aren't aren't in the place that they would like to be, is because when you want to change, when you want to go after something new, you first have to believe in your worthiness of having something different and having something better. And so that's the part where like you and I come in, where we can help to untangle, okay, like why, what is it about your worthiness? And I had to do the same thing for myself. Like I did not believe in my worthiness of lots of things. And so for me, I've completely changed my whole life around in the past 4 years. But
Mhm.
it's taken me a really long time because I've not only had to find the steps to make the changes, to figure out, okay, this is what I like and what I don't like about my life, and what I like and what I don't like about myself, which is, whew, so hard to do.
Yeah.
But then I had to find the steps to like the practical steps of like, okay, what do I want to do with my life? And how do I do that? And how do I get there? And then I also simultaneously had to literally change my brain to believe in my worth and my worthiness of having those things that I dream of. Which there are plenty of people out there who just already kind of believe in themselves. They already believe that they're worthy of the thing. So for them, the challenge is like, well, what are the practical X, Y, Z steps to get there? But for a lot of people, it's so much more work than that.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, a lot of the reason why a lot of people don't get there. They quit early. It's hard work.
Yes, it required radical honesty, right? It requires that you shine a light on the darkest parts of who you are, that you look into your shadow patterns and into the behavior that you are not particularly proud of. And that's what I mean with the radical honesty. And yes, it will be painful at times. And then you also are fighting this inbuilt system within yourself that, well, we call ego. And ego is not that you're only thinking of yourself. Ego is actually from the reptilian brain, and it's the part of you that just wants you to survive. Ego's task is just to make sure that you survive and that you are not harmed. And it does so by protecting you from change. So every time you start changing, even if it's adding a meditation practice to your daily routine or going to the gym and things that your conscious mind thinks are awesome, your ego thinks, well, we've never done that before. So that's unknown territory. And unknown territory, by definition, is unsafe because I don't know if there will be danger there. So I'm going to make you stop wanting to do that because then I've done my job. I've prevented you from moving into potentially dangerous territory. And I've kept you safe in what most of us call the comfort zone. That's basically the internal process that is happening whenever we try to change. And if you go at it by yourself, you're fighting all of these things. And it's very difficult to break through it because there are certain things about ourselves that we don't want to see, that we don't want to be confronted with. There are certain behaviors of ourselves that we are blind for, that we just don't see, don't notice, are not aware of. And they can move you away from the thing that you actually want, while at the same time making you think like you're doing everything to get to where you want to be.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. I recently asked, I've been doing a lot of shadow work lately.
Mhm.
Recently asked some people who I'm very close with in my life for some feedback. One of the people I asked for this feedback is my ex-boyfriend, my recent ex-boyfriend. And the feedback being, what are ways in which maybe I'm like holding myself back that you see that perhaps I'm sabotaging a little bit, I'm self-sabotaging, or are there any ways in which I show up that's offensive or annoying or anything like that? Which is a really, and I don't recommend this to people who are new to this work, but also, if you really want to see yourself, a reflection of yourself, um, getting this type of feedback, and also from a recent ex-boyfriend, is is powerful stuff and so
Yes.
scary. And um, what ended up happening was I got this feedback. I was expecting to want to curl up into a ball and cry after I read it. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen here.
I get
Uh,
it.
I had my coach on call, and he sent me back some feedback, and it was tough. He's a very like loving, kind human. So he he knows that I've been doing this work, and so he took it very seriously, which I appreciate and says a
Yeah.
lot about. I don't necessarily recommend this for all people. You have to think really
Who
thoroughly
you're asking it
who
of,
you're
right?
asking. Right.
Yes.
But the point is that, getting this feedback, it really wasn't so bad. Um, and the reason is because a few things. Like, first of all, some of it I was expecting, some of it I already knew. And of course, I think part of that is being an empath, right? Like, I'm kind of already know how you feel about me and what you think.
Yeah.
Um, and it's also, it's one thing to like think you know it, and another to confirm it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but um, the other piece, I think this is really important, is that I was able, because of all this work that I've done, and because of all the tools that I have, I was able to decipher between the feedback that was truly about me versus the feedback that's really just about him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that being able to do that is so important, um, because when you're doing this work and when you're looking in the mirror and you're unpacking stuff and you're like, what do I like about myself? What don't I like about myself? And you're going to learn all sorts of things, and it's going to be super uncomfortable. And some of that is going to be feedback from the world, right? The world's going to mirror or reflect things on you, and you get to decide what you believe and what you don't believe. And it's really important to be able to do that. And it's not easy, and it takes work, and it takes, like anything else, going to the gym and practicing this stuff over and over again. But because I could do that, I could look at this feedback and be like, like that's not about me. That's about him. I'm letting that go. This hurts, but it is about me. And
I
it
need to take
might,
ownership of it.
yeah, I can, but right, but it's for me.
Mm.
So it's not meant to hurt me. It's meant to help me. So
Yes.
it's, while it's hard to hear, it's like, whether or not I want to hear this feedback, it exists. Like whether or not I want to know about it, other people are receiving me in this way. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I'm like, well, I'd like to know about that, because if I'm showing up like, I don't know if you can swear here, like an a-hole, um, I'd like to fix that, because I don't want to show up that way to the
Oh,
people, to anyone.
exactly. Or if
Certainly not
people
to people.
think I'm a bitch, I would like to know why.
I would like to know why.
Yeah.
And I would like to work on changing it. And if they come back and they're like, these are why, and I'm like, oh, that's not about me, that's about you, then I
Mm-hmm.
can let that go.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been really like eye-opening and like life-changing for me to realize that I can pick and choose the feedback that I want,
Mm-hmm.
that I believe is about me and not about me. And it's sort of spilled over into all the other things that I do. And so when I get scared about something, like I just launched a new little business, and I'm like, normally I just literally finished the website this morning. And I would work on it for like weeks and weeks, and I'd be like, oh, it's not, my perfectionism would kick in, and I'd be like, it's
Perfect. Yeah.
not done, and whatever. And maybe this is great and maybe this is terrible. That's another thing that I struggle with. Like, I'm a creator, and sometimes I'm like, this could be amazing, and this could also be horrible. And I don't know how to decide, but I don't know how to figure out which is right. And that's ego protecting me. That's my inner brain being like, oh, I don't know if you want to put that out there. Somebody might think it's terrible. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and now I'm like, no, I'm going to finish this website in like 2 days, and it'll probably keep changing, but for right now, it's fine. And
Mm-hmm.
it gets the point across. And I think it's pretty good. I think the idea is pretty great. And I'll find out because I'm going to get feedback in the world. And it's, I'm choosing to believe the good stuff right now. I'm choosing to believe, no, this is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, could it be better? Sure, but it's good enough. I'm choosing to believe that over like, oh, this is probably terrible. It doesn't look like the professional websites that I see out there. How am I, all the things that are swirling in my head, which are swirling in my head. And I'm also saying, nah, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yes, you can be aware of all of those things and think, oh yeah, I recognize that because that's I've often responded to that this way, but now I'm just going to choose to ignore it and trust.
Right. Yeah. And decide,
Exactly.
choose. I get to choose. I get to choose. I always get to choose like what, and it's like I was thinking about this too when I was a kid. When I was really little, I always kind of felt like I had something, and I'm going to incorporate this in my next talk, but I always felt like I had something special. Like I was, I had some sort of talent as a little kid. I like loved to dance and I loved to sing and I loved to act. I was like a piano player, I did all the creative things as a little kid and I was always like good at it. Like, maybe not like the best, but I was always like pretty good at
Hmm.
kind of all the things that I tried. Um, and I always felt like, okay, I've got something, but enough times I was told that I wasn't good enough. I was stupid. I should do something practical with my life. Like all of that stuff.
Hmm.
And again, like going back to being an empath and a highly sensitive person, I received that as truth. I was hearing it from people that I trusted, like my parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, just super, super sensitive, thinking like, okay, well, that must be true. They must be right. I must be wrong. I'm
Hmm.
going to trust them. And also, this feels really bad. And it, I made myself smaller and smaller and smaller. And I went through life feeling like I wasn't good enough and I wasn't smart enough and I
Hmm.
wasn't capable and I wasn't worthy. And, but something was always pushing me forward to live a little bit outside the box to, I never worked in corporate. I was always told I was going to be a teacher. And I was like, not that there's anything wrong with teaching. They're incredible. My sister's a teacher. Like I'll give all my tax money to all the teachers. But um, I wanted to, see if I could do something else in my life. And I was in the wine industry, and now I'm, a podcaster, and I'm a speaker, and I'm a life coach, and I've just launched this new like legacy video um, business. And for while I like had this belief in myself that I or like lack of belief in myself that I wasn't capable and I wasn't smart enough and I would never amount to anything, um, there was something always innate in me that was making me try new things and live slightly outside the box. And it was always
Hmm.
very confusing to me, like, well, if I do have such a low confidence, then why am I constantly
Trying
trying
this
to
or
thing?
doing this or
Right,
thinking about this. Yeah, I
right.
recognize what you're saying. I have a similar experience. Yes.
Yeah. And I just realized like, oh, it's because of what happened. It was like this like big bubble when I was a little kid that I was like, talented and good at something and maybe, had something that other people didn't. And it got smaller and smaller and smaller as this other bubble kept growing, growing, growing that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or capable enough. And now as an adult, and I'm realizing this and I'm able to decipher between the feedback. I'm like, that bubble of me not being smart enough, good enough, or capable is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And this other bubble where I'm like, no, I'm like kind of creative and talented and smart and good at these things is
Yeah.
growing bigger and bigger. So
And somewhere in your story, you also mentioned your own coach. So, would you say that you also benefited from finding professional help in this journey?
yes, I can do anything without professional help. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Yes. I have two coaches and I've had many others who just, our time expired, but for no like reason other than that. But I laugh because it's like, yeah, like literally, if you go on my website, you'll see we can't do life alone. We're not supposed to do life alone. And
Exactly.
we believe that we don't have to do life alone. um, you know, yeah, I feel like I hear this a lot, and you probably hear this a lot in this space, but there's no professional athlete that gets to be their great, selves without a team of people behind them.
Mhm.
And that's true for humans. Like we all need support, and there's nothing wrong with asking for help. In fact, if you don't ask for help, you're selling yourself short. Like you're
Mhm.
missing a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
Um, I there's no way I could do anything that I'm doing without the
No,
team.
I'm very glad that you're sharing that because that's also been my experience. But I still know that some people told me, oh, because of your articles or because of your videos, I now finally came out of the closet. That tells me that for a lot of people, being sensitive, and so being a highly sensitive person, being an empath, is still something with a lot of shame around it. And that's also often preventing people from reaching out and asking for help or looking for professional help. So, that's why I wanted to ask you this because I want the listeners today to know that if you are going through anything of the things that we've talked about today, and you're recognizing any of these things, and you don't want to feel that way anymore, but you want to move into the direction that we also talked about, where you are proud of yourself and you love your life and you know your strengths and you're catering to them, and you're having a profession or earning money based off of your talents and your strengths, then reach out. Either reach out to me, and my links are always below this video, or reach out to Molly, because it takes tremendous strength to ask for help, to recognize when you can no longer do it alone, and to then reach out to someone, because that also requires trust. And more often than not, our trust has been broken by so many people. So it can be very difficult to reach out, but know that there's a safe place to reach out to me, and there's a safe place to reach out to Molly. So, Molly, how can people reach you?
Yeah. Yes. Please do reach out if it's not, to one of us or somebody. You can reach me on my website. It's probably the easiest place. It's just mollysider.com, my first and last name.com. And I'm also on Instagram at Molly at this age. Those are the best places.
I love it. I will make sure that the links that Molly just mentioned are also included in the show notes. So even if you didn't quite catch it, just go to the show notes and look through them, and you will find all of our information and all of our links. Because I think the biggest message maybe of today's talk is there's nothing wrong with you. You are just an empath. And if you learn exactly what that means, what the ins and outs are of your user manual, and how to then work with your talents and your strengths instead of trying to suppress them or trying to mold yourself into being someone you're not, but embrace them, life becomes so much more fun, so much more effortless, and so much more worth living. And the first step could be to just talk to one
Yeah.
of us.
Yeah. And can I just add one more thing to that?
Yeah, please.
That not only does it become so much easier, but you start to, even though it's so hard to start sharing and to start looking at yourself in the ways that we've talked about, you start to realize actually how much harder it is to not do those things once you start doing this work. And you're like, oh, wow, it's so much harder to stay in that space, in that unhappy, um, you know, space all alone than it is to start sharing and to doing the work and to reflecting. And it, it just gets so much easier. It's so much more fun.
Exactly. Yes. And also, if you do start working on yourself, you will never revert back to that person you were there. It's a one-way street kind of thing, right? If you start to awaken yourself, if you start to open up to everything that you are, there's no going back anymore. The only way is forward or up, or however you want to be calling it, towards your higher self, your authentic self, your true self, your best self. There are so many different names that people use for it, but yeah, the self that you love being. That's the essence of our talk today. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, 100%. Yes.
Ah, wonderful. So I've really loved our talk, and I hope you out there, listener, viewer, have loved this talk as much as I did. And I would love it even more if you could share your biggest insight or your key takeaway from our talk today, also below this video, and maybe like it and share it with your audience, because you never know who needs to hear this, who might be struggling with things like this and is ashamed or afraid to come out of their closet. And this might be the thing that helps put them on the path to joy and happiness, and just being happy to be who you are. So thank you so much for being here, Molly, and having this wonderful inspirational talk with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was such a delight.
Yes, for me as well. Thank you also, viewer, listener out there, for your ongoing support, for always tuning in, for always listening to every episode, and sharing it with your people. I love you, and I will see you next week with another fabulous guest. For now, have an amazing rest of your day, your week, or your weekend, depending on when you're seeing this. And until next time.